Welcome to The Disciplined Life. I'm Aria.
And I'm Coda.
We use our experience as a married couple living in a domestic discipline marriage to talk about the ups and downs of implementing authority structure and domestic discipline into modern relationships.
Let's do it. Hello, everyone.
On today's podcast, we are going to be talking through one of our most recent punishments and talking about the emotional aspect of going through punishment on our prospective sides of the relationship.
This is going to be a two-part episode where in this first part we're going to focus on the emotional preparation we go through leading up to punishment.
But before we get started, if you are not already, please subscribe. We are really close to 1,000 subscribers and it would be an amazing goal to hit. So please help us hit that goal by subscribing if you are not already. Leave this video a like, leave a comment. It really does help out the channel. And if you want to support the channel further, a link to our Patreon is down below. On Patreon, you get a post show to go along with these weekly podcasts, as well as bonus content throughout the month and access to our Discord server. But without further ado, let's get into the topic. So our most recent punishment was about a week and a half ago. And we're just going to kind of tell it story time style, and then we will kind of interject with the emotional aspects of going through that process. And because I know that I definitely have like an emotional process attached to punishment. Would you say that you do as well?
Yeah. And I don't know if a lot of head of households do or not. So I'd be interested in knowing your thoughts about that in the comments. But I definitely do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So our most recent punishment was, it happened because I can't remember exactly the circumstances of the night previous to that, but we had a misunderstanding the night before, and I basically decided that I didn't want to follow the rules in that moment, and I completely disregarded my bedtime, which is one of our bigger rules. If you've been listening to the podcast in any capacity, you've probably heard us reference my bedtime more than once, because it is one of our longer standing rules and something that is still very necessary to be a rule. Mostly because I am a night owl and prefer to stay up if given the opportunity. So I was told to be in bed by 12:30, which it was already later than my usual bedtime. But I decided that I didn't necessarily want to adhere to that request and came to bed closer to 1. I think it was about 12:50 when I came to bed, so considerably late. And our rule is that if I am more than 10 minutes late, that I do get a harder spanking for breaking that rule. And the first aspect of going through punishment, the first thing that the first emotional aspect about going through that process was feeling guilty because I knew I'd broken a rule. I knew that I had done something that was outside of the expectations and outside of what I should have done. But also frustration because because you extended my bedtime, it was not registered in the app what I had done. And you didn't follow up. You didn't check in and you didn't say, hey, did you make it to bed on time? And so I felt like there was a lack of accountability and a lack of follow through from your perspective. And so I was frustrated, but I was also feeling guilty. And it was like this perfect storm of emotions that kind of created a little bit of, I didn't mean it to come off as hostile, but I think it did.
It did. And it was, I think I remember saying this to you, that it was like borderline disrespectful.
It was. And again, I didn't mean for it to come off that way, but I think that all of the emotions I was feeling in that moment just kind of created a little bit of this perfect storm to kind of create just a bad start to our morning, really.
Yes, and I don't know how far you want me to go into my emotion, but at least at that point in the emotional cycle, I am someone that, depending on what the infraction is, but most of the time it's just a feeling of disappointment. It is very rare that I get to a point of anger, and I can talk a little bit more about that later, but in a situation like that, it's more disappointment.
So I was dropping you off at work that morning because I needed to have, we share a car, so I needed to have our car for an appointment that afternoon. So I was dropping you off at work. And it finally came around that I had stayed up past my bedtime. I finally kind of fessed up to that because I didn't fess up right away. Mostly, I think, because I was waiting for you. I was waiting for you to ask. I was waiting for that follow through, but I was also waiting to see if that's what was really bothering me. Because confession time, I guess, I have stayed up past my bedtime in the past and it doesn't necessarily bother me. And if you don't ask, then I just kind of let it go. I'm not going to be doing that anymore. But so I didn't really know that that's what was bothering me. But once I finally kind of cued in, like, hey, I'm feeling a little guilty for how I allowed my response to become a misbehavior. And so do you remember when I fessed up and it was brought to your attention that I had broken a rule in a pretty extreme way? What were you feeling in that moment?
Well, I believe that was when right before we had parked in the parking lot, and we had been talking that morning, and I was already kind of in a state because of the conversation we were having. The reason it came up is the conversation was already feeling a little tense. So that's the word. I was already feeling a little tense. And so then when you told me, then that's when I had the feeling of disappointment, and also this feeling of, okay, I guess there will be a punishment given. And so I'm a very task-oriented person. But I'm a goal-oriented person. We've talked a lot about this on the podcast. So immediately I went, okay, this needs to be taken care of so that we can mend the relationship, because I would describe it as there was a little bit of a rift that had happened at that point. So I felt a rift, and I felt disappointment.
I definitely think that makes sense. So at that point, you had to go to work, and I had to go home and go throughout my day. I definitely feel like I'm able to compartmentalize when things like that happen. Like on the drive home, I kind of processed through like that I had made a bad choice and that there would be consequences given that evening. But I'm able to kind of put that on a shelf to a certain extent and just go throughout my day and not really dwell on it, not think about it, not anticipate for hours. What about you? Like,
I've learned that over the years. This is part of me being living in the profession of being a performer. I've had to learn how to compartmentalize. I have to do it. And that's just something that I've learned to do really, really well because I am a performer. There have been times where I've gotten terrible news has happened in my life. All kinds of different things happen, and you have to learn because you go on stage to put that aside because your audience doesn't know, and nor should they. Perform, and then you can pick it back up later. So I've learned, because of that, being a performer, I've learned how to do that in everyday life. So I had to go work, and it was not time to dwell on that. So I just put that in the compartment, and I said, I'll pick it up after the day's over.
And so the next part, like the next aspect of that day, was I picked you up. And did we talk at all? I can't remember. Did we talk about the punishment or what was going on at all? Talk about that, because I can't remember.
Yeah, we talked. Well, first I asked how your day was, and you told me, and we had kind of gotten caught up on our days, and then I told you that I would be following through with the punishment, and that would definitely be one of the hard punishments because of how late that you came to bed. And then I asked you specifically, okay, why did you do that? Why did you choose to do that? And then I apologized, I remember, on my part for not following up, for not checking the app, for not doing some of the things that I should have done. But also I did what I do a lot now, is reiterate. Just because maybe I dropped the ball in areas didn't mean that it was okay for you to do that. And so then we talked about schedule when the punishment would take place, and that was basically all we got through until we got home. Not got to the punishment, but got home.
And so I think at that point, that's when, in my mind, it's like, okay, now you're home. Our evening has started. So that's when the anticipation and that kind of nervous anticipation comes into play. Because now it's like, okay, the clock is ticking down the time. It's getting a lot closer, and it's kind of inevitable at that point. I mean, it was all day, but it feels a lot more inevitable at 4 o'clock rather than, 10 in the morning. So we got to the point in the evening where the punishment was taking place. You have gotten into a habit, which I think is a good habit, of coming out before a punishment happens. Can you talk through kind of your process through that? Because when you come out here, a lot of couples use corner time. And I think that corner time does serve a purpose. However, for us, corner time was not something that was beneficial. It wasn't a net benefit for our relationship. And I guess we could kind of talk through that at some point. I don't know if now's the best time to talk through that, but we don't use traditional corner time. All that to say, but we still need the time and the benefit of the time that corner time provides. And so you have gotten to the point where we hold our punishments out in our studio. That's just what works best for our living arrangement. If we were holding punishments in our bedroom, then you would go into the bedroom alone. So it's definitely something, this is a process that's adaptable. If we did use corner time and I was in the corner, then you would send me to the corner and you would have time to yourself wherever you were. So it's really adaptable to what works for you and where you're holding punishments. So you decided when you started this process that you were going to come out to the studio, and that's where you were going to have your alone time, in this space where the punishment was going to happen, to prepare mentally. I do my own mental preparation during that time as well, but I want you to kind of talk through what your mental preparation as the head of the household, as the disciplinarian, as the one holding the paddle, what do you do to prepare yourself?
Well, it's very, very similar to what I do when you drop me off that morning. I go immediately to my office, and I just have to spend the first part of what I do is I spend some time trying to let the emotions go so that I can compartmentalize where I'm at. So it's very similar to what I do in the morning. I come out here and I try to say, okay, now I need to focus on what is about to happen. So I need to let go of anything that happened during the day. I need to let go of work. I need to let go of school for the time being. I need to even let go of some of the things that maybe we are good or bad working on with our daughter just for the time being. Need to forget about the dog just a little bit. And I first start at the beginning of the process just letting my day go and focusing on what we're about to do, putting everything in its own compartment and just saying, okay, right now is to focus on my relationship with Arya and the punishment at hand. Once I feel like I've got a good handle on that, and I try not to take too long in that process because the process that I think takes the longest, but it's also the most important, is now thinking about, okay, as we go through the punishment, what are the things that she needs to hear from me? I need to speak the truth. Yes, I need to own up maybe to my side, but I need her to understand why she's being punished for this, why if she does this again, she will be punished for it. I need to actually hear from her. I want her to go through the process in her mind about why she should not do this again. Why did you do this in the first place? So that she can reason and realize why this is a problem. And then think about, I actually try to go through the punishment in my mind about how I think the sequence of events needs to go so that I'm not, because again, I'm a very check the box kind of person. I'm a very visual person. So they talk about visualizing the win in sports. I visualize how the punishment's going to go from start to finish so that I can talk through things. I don't fumble over my words because I don't want to fumble over my words when I'm talking to her. And I want to go through the emotions that I potentially am going to go through, that I know I'm going to go through during the punishment, to make sure that the punishment is given rightly, correctly, that I don't, if I get angry for some reason throughout the punishment, because the punishment sometimes can bring anger, that is not not necessarily shown, but because I think showing it can be a good thing a little bit, but that I don't take that anger out on her during the punishment, that the punishment does exactly what it's supposed to do, very clearly says, you violated the rules, that was not okay. If you do this again, this will be your punishment again. But use this as an opportunity to learn from this, and this pain that you're going through. Remember, yet this is something that you earned. And so if you don't want to go through it again, don't let this happen again. So that is my whole process to go through, put my to kind of sum it up, put everything in my life except for what I'm about to do in a compartment so that I'm focused on what I'm about to do, and then play through the whole thing in my mind so that when Arya gets in here and we begin, there's no doubt about what's going to happen. There's no doubt in my mind about what I'm going to say, how she's going to be treated, from start to finish. And that includes after the punishment is over too, that I let her know that forgiveness has happened, that the slate is wiped clean, and that I embrace her and let her know that she is loved and she is cared for, and that we are going to start new as soon as we walk out those doors. So that's my whole process while I'm out here.
It's interesting that you go through like that much, like you really do go through like the entire thing in your head. And that's good. It's good to be mindful, and it's good to be prepared, especially as the one leading the discipline session. Obviously, I don't have to prepare in that way because my job in punishment is to accept the decision that you've made in the discipline. And so I don't need to visualize. I need to prepare myself to accept it. And so when you come out here and I'm left in the house, it is tempting to just busy myself, to kind of distract myself until the inevitable time rolls around. But I really do try to sit and reflect on what's about to happen. I try to remind myself about my misbehavior so that it's fresh in my mind, so that when you do talk to me and you do lecture me about what I did, I'm more primed to accept responsibility and to own up to my misbehavior. I try to rid myself of any temptation to justify my behavior. And sometimes I have that sense of regret and that sense of why did I do this? Like, why did I misbehave? Especially this time, because it was something so intentional, which was reflected in how the punishment was conducted, because you are very much, you are harsher with intention. Like, if I am intentional in my misbehavior, then that is definitely reflected on how you conduct the punishment, rather than if it was a true mistake, you take that into consideration as well.
Yes, and by the way, when you were talking, I'm glad that you try to take some time to reflect and ask yourself the question, why did you do this? And obviously you all can tell we haven't talked about this beforehand because we wanted you guys to hear us in a kind of going through our process, so that you could hear that the surprise, because and this is a good surprise. I'm glad that you do that. I'm glad that you go through all of that. One thing that I did forget to mention is that the other thing that I do is I try to really focus on not paying attention to time. Because I'm somebody, I think we've mentioned before, time is something that I'm always very conscious of, because I have a lot of things to do and I want to make sure that I'm using my time adequately. But during a punishment, there can be a temptation, if I'm not careful, to potentially want to speed things up depending on what I have on my plate and I still have to do. And that's not good. So the first thing I do is I try to figure out a way that the phone goes in a different part of the room that I can't see it, and I immediately tell myself time doesn't matter right now. All that matters is however long it takes to get this punishment accomplished.
And that's good. Obviously, when you're out here, you give me a time frame of when I'm expected to be out here. But that's the only time that I really pay attention to the clock, to make sure that I'm not unintentionally delaying the beginning of the punishment. And so, yeah, even though I'm not standing in a corner, even though I'm not being directed and it doesn't have any protocol around it, I still try to take that time to reflect and to prepare myself mentally to accept the punishment. Now, because we are more meticulous in how we kind of have set up our domestic discipline, I know going in kind of what the range of what to expect, right? So I know when you told me that it was going to be a hard punishment, I knew exactly why, because that had already been pre-negotiated. That was not something you sprung on me. And I kind of know what to somewhat expect out of that. Like, I know the process and I know somewhat the length. There is some variation there, and there is, obviously you can choose, but I really try hard not to pay attention and not to count and because I try to just be very present in the moment, to be reflective and be more just present through that punishment, to learn from it. Keeping count and keeping track is your responsibility, and you can extend that if you want to, and it's not my job to keep count and then question you through that.
Thank you for joining us for part 1. In part 2, we will be delving into the punishment process and talking through how we conduct our punishment, as well as how we process our feelings and emotions through that as well.
So, again, our link to our Patreon is down below if you want to get the podcast in video form. Give this video a like and subscribe if you're not already. We'll see you next time.